Good afternoon. Welcome to Preservation Connecticut's Fall 2024 series, talking about preservation, our noontime chats about everything preservation. I'm Jane Montanaro, Executive Director of Preservation Connecticut, and I'm pleased to be your host today. Today, we're chatting about LGBTQ places in Connecticut with Central Connecticut State University Professor William Mann, an SCSU student and Preservation Connecticut Fellow, Anna Fossi. I'd like to begin the program by sharing with you information about Preservation Connecticut. Preservation Connecticut is the statewide, private nonprofit historic preservation organization founded in 1975 by a special act of the Connecticut General Assembly as the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation to preserve, protect, and promote the buildings, sites, and landscapes that contribute to the heritage and vitality of Connecticut's communities. We are statutory partners with the State Historic Preservation Office, and I'm proud to say that for 49 years, we have successfully championed the protection of remarkable community assets all over the state by leveraging funding, advocating, forming partnerships, and promoting stewardship. Our office is located in the Eli Whitney Boarding House on Whitney Avenue in Hamden, Connecticut. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's the only surviving residential structure of the industrial village that's centered on Eli Whitney's armory, and it has served as Preservation Connecticut's headquarters since 1989. We have a staff of 9 preservation professionals and a board of 21 preservationists from around the state. Staff listed here are always available to assist with inquiries. Christopher Wiegren is our Deputy Director. Contact Chris for information on historic preservation easements, our bi-monthly magazine, Connecticut Preservation News, our Olmsted in Connecticut survey, or to arrange a book talk for his book, Connecticut Architecture, Stories of 100 Places. Renee Trebert, Making Places and Preservation Services Manager. Contact Renee for information on redevelopment of historic industrial sites and tax credit applications. Jordan Sorensen is our Development and Special Projects Manager. Jordan manages our communications and outreach to members through social media and email, receives and monitors demolition notices from municipalities, and prepares historic tax credit applications and nominations to the state and national registers of historic places. Kristen Hopewood, Membership and Outreach Manager, manages all of the inquiries that come through our website, provides member services, arranges special events, and is the editor of our Historic Properties Exchange, a free listing of threatened historic properties. And finally, our team of circuit riders, Mike Farino, Brad Scheid, Stacy Vero, and Stefan Danchuk, who provide immediate boots-on-the-ground service to homeowners, developers, municipal leaders, nonprofit organizations and museums, historic district commissions, and many more with an array of preservation technical assistance, including community organizing, prioritizing maintenance and repairs, historic designations, funding, and archaeology. These lunchtime chats have become an important and enjoyable tool to help us meet our mission. We're able to connect with the public and hear what's on your mind. Please feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions at the end of the presentation, or contact us afterwards for a site visit or a call. Next week, in celebration of Halloween, we're going to be talking with the Barnum Museum about fantastical stories and objects from the Barnum Museum collection. And we'll also get an update on their restoration work that they've been doing for the last few years. So that is the end of my quick intro, and I will turn it over to Dr. Mann and Anna. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Great.
Welcome, Dr. Mann.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having us here today. You know, I can't tell you how excited I am to see the direction in historical preservation, historical research in Connecticut over the last several years. There was a time when I started working as a historian, when I first started teaching at CCSU, there seemed to be little interest in looking into preserving and documenting the queer history of the state, which is quite significant as several of my classes have discovered. And it's really great to see the the importance of this history is being recognized. And so it's really exciting to be a part of this project. I can't wait to see the map, the final map. I know all of the very many, the different places that Anna and I were talking about, including all of which um, have so many stories to be told that the amount of research that has been done already is pales in the amount of research that can continue to happen. So I'm really excited about that. When I started teaching at CCSU in 2014, it was the first time that the university had offered an LGBTQ history course. And I was, so honored to be able to help develop that course. And from that course, other courses emerged. So I also taught the history of AIDS. I've taught history of LGBTQ film, fiction. But most rewarding for me have been the public history courses that I taught, in which we have collaborated with the Connecticut Historical Society, which is now the Connecticut Museum for History and Culture, Connecticut Landmarks, the Jewish Historical Society of Greater Hartford, and now it's great to be working with Connecticut Preservation. And the idea of looking at this history through a new lens is always so exciting, and not only for the people who receive this history. So I think as historians, it's been so exciting for me to work with young historians in digging out this history, seeing this history unfold, and how queer people played important roles in the history of the state. And it's history that is relevant today. It continues to be relevant. I think right now we're in a period of time where this history has never been more important to document and to let people know and see. Um, my first work in the public history program at CCSU was working with Anna was a part of that class. And others. I think Andy King was also not that class, but a later class. Um, was working with compiling a timeline of Connecticut's LGBTQ history from the very earliest days to the present, and documenting that really opened up, how much history is out there to be uncovered. It's so a project like this, mapping these historical places, it's an idea whose time has finally come. I remember proposing the idea to one of my colleagues at CCSU, looking at the maps done for New York and other places. So I'm so happy that this has been done, because once we recognize the places that this history occurred, we can document it, we can preserve it, we can make sure that future generations know that something happened here that was important, and something happened here that is worth remembering. So delighted, so happy to be a part of this project, and so excited about what is still to come. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna, and Anna can give us a walkthrough on the incredible work that she has done.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll just talk a little bit um, about this project and kind of what it means for somewhere to be an LGBT space. Um, and there's and how I went about identifying them, and um, what what ended up being included on this map. So when this map is actually shared and available, there's going to be a lot less sites on there than I have actually found. There's still there's about 142 that we identified. And I have put them into kind of different categories. So I'll start sharing that presentation with you. Right. Nope, I don't want to share it that way. Okay. So you can see here kind of how these are split up, and how we determined what defines an LGBT space. So early on, these wouldn't necessarily be places that were built by LGBT people. You would kind of have to find by word of mouth what places were friendly to queer people, and slowly, that place would grow and become an LGBT space. So certain bars and restaurants would slowly be known to be a friendly place. And you also have places later on, starting maybe the 60s and 70s, that started to be run by more openly queer people. And that's kind of a natural pathway into becoming a queer space. And then I've also included places that were protested by the LGBT population, and that kind of will represent spaces that they have been historically excluded from, and how they let that be publicly known, that these institutions stood for something that, excluded them. So I'll start with, some of the more interesting places I found. So there's Frank's Place in New London, which is very interesting, finding geographically where these places were. So a lot of them would be in cities, and a lot of them would grow more naturally if they were somewhere that was kind of on the coast or a seaport, because you would have more people coming in, and especially like sailors in the 50s and 60s and 40s. And it's a little easier to be anonymous in a city. So not everyone would be in your business as much. So that was, cities kind of became a more natural space for LGBT people to congregate and also be more openly themselves. So I also think it's interesting in the 80s that a lot of these bars really came together, and it wasn't just a social gathering space. It also was kind of a hotbed of activist activity for some, and like, for example, Frank's Place would exchange their bartenders and raise money for the local AIDS projects. I don't know if Professor Mann wants to talk about that at all.
Yeah, I'd be happy to chime in here, because bars and nightclubs for a very long time, were the only place that queer people had to meet each other and to feel safe. I'm teaching LGBT history this semester, and we've just finished talking about the Black Cat in San Francisco, in which Jose Sarria, you know, told people that, here you are home. Out on the street, you aren't safe, but here inside these bars, you are safe. And I know that as a young man going to the Cheyenne, I was at Frank's place, and you felt when you walked in there, I'm safe. And you know, people say, well, why is there such a focus on bars and nightclubs in the gay community? Well, it's because those were the spaces that were made for us. These were the spaces that were available for us. This was before um, bookstores and community centers were open to queer people, out queer people, obvious queer people. So bars were really the haven, and so it's so important to recognize the community element of these bars. As Anna points out, these bars worked together, especially during the AIDS crisis. They were a place of disseminating information, and yeah, the fundraising that was done in the bars of Connecticut for AIDS was phenomenal. There was also a something that came to me in talking with students today, is that, not so much it's not so much bars that they miss. They just miss these community gathering spaces because we don't have the same anymore. And it's harder for younger queer people to connect with each other except online. And, we do have community centers, we do have bars, we do have bookstores and various other ways for people to get together. But the community that these bars in Connecticut throughout the state really fostered, it was a way for people to come together and feel part of a larger community.
Yeah, and I know you've also talked to me a bit about it not always being, everyone not always necessarily being on the same page about what this space should be. Like, not everyone agreed that activist activity should be happening there, and it should just be, a place for everyone to have fun. And so there was, these places were never just one thing that everyone agreed on.
Yeah, that's
It
very true. Yeah. There was some bars that, or not so much the bars themselves, but patrons of the bars who said, we don't want you in here getting, signing petitions for a gay rights bill, for example. That's too political. We're just here to have fun. But especially during the AIDS crisis, we saw most of the Connecticut establishments really coming together. And it was a place some people didn't drink when they went to the bars. They went there just for the music and to meet people and to talk. You're right, Anna. These were community spaces that there was a little bit of politics, there was a little bit of dancing, there was a lot of cruising, and they served as the lifeblood for people. They, after work on Friday, they'd be there. Friday night, they'd be there. Saturday night, they'd be there for Sunday tea dance. So they really were home for a lot of people.
And yeah, and like you said about younger people talking about there not being these community spaces as much. When you look through this map, you're going to see a huge influx of spaces in the 1970s and 1980s. And a lot of them, or yeah, a handful of them kind of burned really bright in the 80s and then disappear.
Right.
And you really see a lot of them start closing in the 2010s and early 2000s.
Right. Yeah, you can track that with the rise of the internet, with the rise of dating apps. Also, I think it's as queerness became more visible and more accepted within the culture, there was a feeling for some people that we don't need these separate spaces. But from what I hear today, these separate spaces are still needed, and I'm hoping that we can bring some kind of social spaces back for young queer people.
Right, I'll move on to the next one. So, Cedarbrook was a very, very long-standing
Yeah.
bar, and also brings up some some preservation issues. So it falls into that category of somewhere that was not opened by queer people, but it became known in the community that it was a friendly, safe space to go. And so it's sometimes referred to as like one of the first or the first gay bars in Connecticut, and even one of the country's oldest.
Yeah.
And that's another one that, like Frank's Place, closes in 2010. And there was a pretty big upset in the community about it kind of falling into disrepair. But while it was around, it was a significant gathering place.
Yeah, we always knew it as the Brook. I know it was originally Cedar Brook Cafe, but we always called it the Brook. And what was great about the Brook was that it was a completely different community than we knew in Hartford and New Haven. It was because this was a more New York centered community, being down in Westport. And over the years, the Brook, you know, there were a lot of celebrities that would come up from the city who might be spotted at the Brook. So the Brook had a certain glamour to it, you know, like, oh, let's go down to the Brook tonight. You know, there was, you know, it was seen as being, you know, we're actually going to be sophisticated for the night. And yet it was this, you know, tiny little log cabin in a way, but it had a certain glamour.
Yeah, it was one of the few places in Fairfield County, because you're gonna
Right.
also see a lot of these places are very concentrated in New Haven and Hartford.
Right.
So it was while I was going through and making this map, it was very important to dig in and find places that weren't just New Haven and Hartford, to show that these queer spaces existed everywhere. And that, you know, not everyone was going just to Hartford or New Haven.
Right.
Oh, this is probably one of the more interesting and exciting spaces. So in Connecticut, the activists had been trying to get a gay rights bill passed since the early 70s, which it was called the Gay Rights Bill. It essentially would have prohibited discrimination for housing, for credit, and for employment. And, you know, because people were, if you were found out to be gay, there was really no legal protection against being fired, which happened fairly often. One of the catalysts of the gay rights bill happening was this man, Ken Bland, being fired from the school for the deaf and trying to fight that, and it, you know, it didn't really go anywhere. So after many years, the Connecticut Coalition for Lesbian and Gay Civil Rights planned this action at the Capitol, and you can see over here them throwing this banner behind the governor and demanding gay and lesbian civil rights. And, you know, they kind of said to the Capitol and that establishment that, you know, they weren't taking care of all of their citizens, which is what that building is kind of supposed to represent. So, you know, it it kind of changed for this map, that's what the history of the Capitol is about. Them trying to take back control and some power, and saying that, you know, they need to be listened to.
Yeah, you're right, Anna. That really did change the whole tenor of the debate. And I remember when I learned, I was working at Metroline as the editor at Metroline at the time, and which was the local queer publication, and knowing that these activists were going to do that, primarily women. I think there were 2 men, but it was something like 8 or 9 women. Carolyn Gable is still with us, and several of the people are still with us, but I just saw Carolyn just the other night at CCSU Library. And it was an incredibly courageous thing to do because, of course, these activists faced the heat from not only the people in the building, but also from people within the community who felt that wasn't the way to do things. There was a huge debate that emerged after this action, that this was setting back the cause, and that demanding things was, you're never going to get, what you want if you go in there and demand it. And the answer was, well, we've been asking politely for 10 years and we still haven't gotten it. Ultimately, I think this was a brilliant action. It did get people to notice, to sit up and say, these people are frustrated. And I remember talking with the lobbyist for the gay rights bill, Betty Gallo, who said, one of the things she said to legislators who said, what are you going to do to control these people? And Betty said, I can't control them. And so, if you want to work with me, if we want to prevent these kinds of outbursts in the future, work with me. Let's get this done. So, in fact, it didn't set back the process. It actually helped move the process forward. And yeah, it was an incredibly exciting day, and I remember so very well the all of the discussions around it.
Yeah, I think this also speaks to kind of the importance of a map project like this, where for any of these buildings, unless you were in the know or you went there at the time, or if the building isn't there anymore, you wouldn't think of this history when you're looking at the Capitol. But now you can kind of see it through that queer lens, and also think of it how a lot of queer people who were there or know about this, how they look at the Capitol, or how they look at these buildings that might not stand out in the landscape. All right, the Union Station is another one like that, where you look at it and it's just a train station, but to a lot of queer people in the 40s and 50s, it was first a kind of anonymous place to meet up, because there were so many people passing through there. It was especially a place for gay men to meet up, and then pretty soon it became, a place you would be kind of nervous to be in, because the police caught on. And this is in the 50s, kind of height of McCarthyism and height of this moral panic. So they're targeting people who are different and who kind of challenge the social order. So it's really not a coincidence either that the fact that these people are being arrested is being publicized in the Hartford Courant. It's saying, this isn't how you should be, and it's something you should be afraid of and hide. And then also, like, the Capitol becomes a site of protest in the 70s, where there was what was called the Good Friday March, and the march ended at Union Station, by local LGBT activists.
Yeah, the people say, what were they doing in trying to meet people in the bathrooms at the train station? Well, it's because they had no other places to meet. I mean, it's as simple as that. There were bars. Some people were afraid to go to bars because they didn't want to be seen going in. They might be married. They might be worried about losing their jobs. So you found an anonymous place to meet. And this is in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. And, at a time when there were no protections, there were no advocacies, there was no gay movement at the time to defend these people. That doesn't really come until the 70s in Connecticut. So, attempting to meet people and then, as Anna points out, that their names and addresses are then published in the paper. Most crimes did not have names and addresses, a misdemeanor crime like that. And yet, so these people were humiliated, exposed to their families, lost their jobs. It was part of an orchestrated oppression of queer people during those decades um, to keep them underground and to keep them and to continue the criminalization of homosexuality.
Yeah, and like you're saying, their names and addresses were published. Like really the purpose of some of these vice squads wasn't to arrest all of the queer people, it was to make an example out of some of them, and then you're probably going to be afraid enough that you don't go to this train station, or you don't go to a park that's known as a meeting space.
Right.
All right. And then there's also Finocchia's East in Hartford, which was one of the spaces where there would be drag performances, like by Ivan Valentin and his leading ladies. And this also kind of marks a turning point, where they had just gotten tired of this bar being shut down and raided, because there were people cross-dressing there. So they actually brought this case to the UConn School of Law and got a ban on male impersonators, or male female impersonators.
Yeah, this is an early example of trans history in that many of the trans people, or people we would understand as trans today, in the early years, the only option for them to express who they are, to kind of embrace the gender that they knew belonged to them and was not the one assigned to them at birth. The only way they could do that, express themselves and live authentically, was to become a performer. Many of these people didn't want to be a performer. They were like, I'm happy just to, be who I am. But they could express their true gender only in stage productions or in some kind of theatrical way. So that meant a lot of them were performing in revues like this or in local clubs, but it was against the law. So, dressing in the clothing of the perceived opposite gender was against the law. And so even here we see an attempt to just completely keep this population down and without any kind of other avenue for expression. So it took this Valentine, who's coming in from New York, who has some kind of, somewhat of a reputation, to come into Connecticut and challenge that law, and And, we've seen recently attempts to criminalize drag even today. I mean, even within the last year, which is staggering for me to think about that. But it is true that in Connecticut was one of the first states. Connecticut is often one of the first states, to our credit, to eliminate that ban on female or male impersonation.
And then the last place I'll talk about, which is still around and is, an institution in Bridgeport, is Bloodroot, which is somewhere that was started and intended to be a queer, feminist friendly place. And you can really see that in the way that the restaurant is run, and the clientele it attracts. I remember I was looking through Metroline, which is one of the major sources I used for this. It was a gay publication, and it started in the 80s, 83 or 82.
82 or 83, yeah.
And some of the listings for apartments would say walking distance to Bloodroot. So it was really well known, and still is. So one of the ways you see that is how their kitchen is set up, and just having it be vegetarian and not wanting the staff to have to rely on tips, just paying a living wage to start with, which isn't something that necessarily seems queer on the outside, but a lot of especially the lesbian feminists come from a background of a lot of theory, and like an organizational background, and a lot of it is about just like an overall fight for equality. Like it kind of opens that door, and yeah.
Yeah, I am who I am today because of my early exposure to lesbian feminism. And I was not someone who was raised in an environment to think like that. And being a cisgender male, I was not someone who gave an awful lot of thought about feminism beforehand. But then, being a young man in Hartford at the Reader's Feast, which is it was another lesbian feminist bookshop, began to learn more about the intersections of all oppressions, and certainly then, after spending so much time at the Reader's Feast, I had to go check out Bloodroot, and so we would go down there, and the food was amazing. The first time I think I'd ever had vegan food, and yeah, so these are really, really important cultural spaces, and also learning spaces. A generation of activists came out of these places.
Let's see. So this is kind of what a preview of what the map will look like. Yeah. And I want to go back to kind of talk about how you find this history, because a lot of it isn't, you can't just Google it, a lot of it is in archives. So the archives at Central Connecticut were really helpful for this. They have Carolyn Gablebrett's feminist collections, and I would say Metroline was one of the other really important sources, just going through and finding articles written about these borrowers and people's experiences there, or there were a lot of articles reminiscing about, even in the 80s, about places that used to exist back in the 70s. And you can find a directory of most of these places in each issue of Metroline. And then from there, it's just finding additional information about them. Because once you have the name of a place, you can kind of start to track it throughout its history.
Great. Thank you, Anna, for sharing. And Dr. Mann. So we'll be putting the link to this map in the chat. And it'll be on Preservation Connecticut's website, so you can click through it, check out sites, let us know what you think of the map, if you have anything to add to it or comments. It's certainly a first important step in documenting these sites and trying to capture the history in Connecticut. And so Charlie mentioned the survey is preservation. The very first step is surveying and figuring out what's out there and how we can start to document it and really honor these sites. So I'll open it up to the floor if anyone had some questions or comments or stories to share. Charlie, go ahead. I see your hand.
Can't resist. First of all, I think this is terrific. I love what I'm hearing just because of my own sort of like getting out of college in 1977, getting out of law school in 1981, living through the AIDS scare, having one of my college roommates realize he was gay, which after he got married and had 2 kids, which was kind of unique. You know, I mentioned this, I just put it out there. My son is gay, but he's also trans, and the world's changed a lot. So I'm very glad you are documenting this historical path. I mean, and I think what you mentioned, William, was, and Anna, we're losing these sites in some ways. They're not there anymore. And why is that? And maybe it's a good thing because we're progressing into more open sites that people are discovering and that are just standing on their own as queer places that people can go to and feel comfortable. So I asked the question, which is, Anna, what was the one that surprised you the most? And I'll lead off by saying that the one that surprised me the most in this list was actually learning about Bloodroot. I didn't realize that history to it, and I'm very happy to hear that. So now I'm gonna head up there.
I would say, even though I had done previous work learning about the protest at the Capitol, I think that one surprised me the most. Just the fact that outside of the people who were in those circles at the time, that everyone didn't know about this. It was crazy to me that that kind of action could occur. And you know, if you weren't one of the activists at the time or one of the people that knew them, it kind of, you know, got forgotten for the public a little bit.
Thank you.
And that's, I forgot to mention for one of the sources, doing oral histories is extremely important. I interviewed Jim Dwyer and John Toomey as well, and also Professor Mann and a number of the activists who were there, including Carolyn Gable-Brett. Yeah, that was the most surprising one when I learned about it a few years ago.
So I just have one sort of fact to throw out. One place you might want to check is the James Merrill House in Stonington. It's actually a National Historic Site, and Merrill, you know, he came out early so that might be one to consider. And if folks don't know about it, it's a marvelous place to see.
Thank you for mentioning that. I'm Kim Hughes. I'm the director of the James Merrill House, and I would love to learn about the process of adding our organization to this list.
Yeah, the process is we just do a little write-up on it, and it can go in.
Perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll reach out to you directly via email.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, it would. I believe it's in the big spreadsheet, and then for kind of the initial batch of them, I think I was trying to focus on places that weren't that were a lot more hidden.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
it'll be included.
John, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you for putting this whole presentation on. It was very nice for you to do something so public for the gay rights movement. And I want to thank Anna for the interview that we spent with you on gathering data for all these locations. Hi, Charlie.
Hello, thank you.
Professor Bill, we've never met, but I don't know if you've ever met Jim Dwyer, the original owner and founder of the Metro line.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. Long time ago. Yes, one of the heroes of the community. With John Crowley, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. They called him John the First. Never mind. But you know, we would like to come and visit you. I was just talking with Ambrose yesterday at an event. But the one thing that I'd like to add to the state capitol location was in 1979, the very first bill for gay civil rights was introduced by state senator from East Hartford, Maricela Fahey, who ended up being our neighbor. Marcel and I went to MCC together and didn't know each other. We both transferred to Central Connecticut, my alma mater. Didn't ever know her then, but we ended up moving next door to her when we bought a house in '93, and we discovered that history. I had no idea what had happened in 1979. And her and another Republican state senator introduced the very first, and it only took 12 years. And for this kind of an issue, for the way things work in America, 12 years is rather almost quick. And when the civil rights legislation finally passed in 1991 in the spring, at the very next Gay Pride in June, Jimmy was co-chair of Gay Hartford Pride. And it was something to be able to witness the thrill of the crowd that was in Bushnell Park at that event. It showed how important the issue had become, and that it established our freedom here in Connecticut. Thanks again for doing this. It's great to. It's great to see everyone.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experiences. This is.
Well, we got more. But the one thing that we are doing, we met already with Mary Donahue from Connecticut Explored. She's going to we are going to do a Grading the Nutmeg
Mhm.
podcast
Great,
or sometime soon.
right.
Super.
You know, this history has to be preserved. And for all of you, thank you so much for doing this and all the different ways that you are preserving our history.
Great. Thanks, John.
Welcome.
Constance. Oh, you have to unmute, Constance.
Hi there.
Hi.
Thank you all for doing this. I can't wait. I just heard about this from the current director, New London Landmarks. And I can't wait to look at all that. Thank you for doing all this. I know how like research, you can just keep going down rabbit holes and it's endless sources. So I posted a resource of a documentary that's not really public yet, but there's tons of resources in there with some that you may want to add to the list. The biggest high profile for this conversation is Bayard Rustin's and Barbara Deming's involvement out at the Voluntown Peace Trust and in New London. It's in my film, but we could talk more. I just wanted to shout out those two people. And, you know, you can eventually look at, you know, some of the names I uncovered in the sites to see if you want to include them in your project. But that's it. Thanks for, you know, doing what you're doing. We'll stay in touch and, you know, hi to the others, you know, so excited to see some of you online and all that you've done for the community. Thanks. Bye.
Great. Thanks, Constance. Yeah, I see there's a lot of great information going up in the chat, a lot of links, documentaries on Bloodroot, more than one. We'll try to capture all these. We like to send out an email afterwards to everyone with the link to the recording, and maybe we can send out all these links as well, capture everything for you.
Yeah, I will say, Constance, I found a bunch of articles about your documentary while I was doing research, and I was trying to, you know, find more information about it so I could watch it.
Yeah, I'm just really swamped right now, but I do have to make some edits. And then because of YouTube and copyright laws, even though we're doing freedom, you know, I'm sorry, fair use. YouTube is really tricky, even though using stuff from the public domain as far as like sound, but music and that. Yeah, so it's going to involve another extra layer of investigation before it gets public. So yeah, but I can share it privately with you so you can watch it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Dr. Rogers, go ahead.
So it's just a fascinating presentation. I'm wondering, Anna and Bill, in your list of 142, how deep historically does this go? Is this mainly a 20th century story, or does the documentation take us back further, even to the 19th century or before?
For right now, it's mainly 20th century. But there are sites in Connecticut that go back way further, which I'd like to add. If you look at the LGBT timeline that's on Connecticut Historical Society's website, that starts back in the 1600s. The other project that we worked on.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of opportunity to extend the list backward as far as, I mean, you know, there were in both the colony of Connecticut and the colony of New Haven, there were hangings of queer people. You know, can we identify where those hangings took place? That might be really interesting to know. Yeah, so I think there's lots of opportunity. You know, the home of Rebecca Primus, perhaps, and Addie Brown, whose letters from the 1850s are at the Connecticut Museum of Culture and History. You know, finding their homes. I think that's, I mean, what's so great about this is that it's an ongoing work, and I think, you know, there's a lot more places that could be added.
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to add stuff that's earlier. It's just, you know, finding where exactly we would mark it with a pin.
Well, it's great to see how this is really starting to take off. Your project, it's getting a lot of interest, and you know, we'll be really happy to see what comes in as we have it up on the website and the comments and contributions that people want to make to this. Before we close out for the afternoon, did anyone have anything else they'd like to add?
Jane,
Yes.
what are we actually calling the route? Is it, I kind of partial to the LGBTQ plus Freedom Trail. What are we calling it?
We're just calling it, let me click on it here. Oh, it's loading. Does it have a formal name, Anna?
I had been going with LGBT historic sites of Connecticut, but you know, I'm not married to that.
Well, as a member of the advisory council, my advice is we call it call it a Freedom Trail. Because, you know, we're certainly not a wine trail or an ice cream trail.
True.
Good suggestion. Thank you, John. Well, thank you to Anna and Dr. Mann for joining us today. This was really a great talk. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing some of your comments and contributions to the map. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Hi, Cindy.